For many years, people have said that the causes of cardiovascular plaque are saturated fats and cholesterol. And I'm here to tell you, I don't think that's the case. Most people overeat carbohydrates, which leads to obesity and diabetes. Not all carbohydrates are the same, though. Some sources of carbohydrates may actually be healthy because of some of the micronutrients they contain. Now, when discussing saturated fat, I do agree with people saying science that's not questioned is religion. I think that also applies to some of the other low-carb foods.
Maybe it even applies to fiber. For years, I've been saying that the number one neglected cause of cardiovascular plaque and therefore heart attacks and strokes is insulin resistance, prediabetes, and diabetes. I've said that cutting carbs is fundamental. However, there is one big caveat that needs to be considered. Not all carbs are the same. Some low-carb foods are very high in nutrients that your body needs without the side effect of spiking your blood sugar and causing arterial plaque. We have Dr. Miranda Graham as a guest today. She'll walk us through these 5 foods. But let's look a little bit deeper before we do, and let me give you a couple of spoilers. One is, no, meat is not on the list. Meat's not a low-carb food. It's a no-carb food. Now, this discussion is going to dip into the fiber debate. Fiber's like mom and apple pie, right? It's a good thing. Well, there's a lot of people questioning that. Robert Lustig, who we had on the show, says we must have fiber. The vegans obviously agree with him. Ken Berry, on the other hand, with Eric Westman and a whole bunch of folks are now saying that's old evidence. We really have no need for fiber. Guess who's going to agree with them? Carnivores, lion diet, those folks clearly agree. Now, what do I say? I've got an opinion, but we'll discuss it in the show. And is it important? Well, I think many of us know there's nothing more important than diet for health. Bad diets have been killing and disabling more than anything else. As if diabetes is not enough, the epidemic of young people with colon cancer is raising eyebrows yet again and causing untold pain, death, disability. Do we know for sure that that's diet? No, but most of us suspect it. Now, whether you're talking to Robert Lustig, myself, Miranda, vegan, carnivore, anybody that's paying attention, I think all of us would agree with one thing. Tony the Tiger should certainly not be taking over dinner. So without further discussion here, let's hand it over to Miranda and to Jesus.
Thank you, Dr. Brewer.
Well, let's let Miranda start. Hi, everybody. I'm just today, guys. I'm just gonna be learning from Dr. Miranda. Let me tell you, if there's somebody who I know that knows about a lot about this type of low carb food, is she. So without further ado, let's go to the top five low carb foods that don't spike blood sugar.
Hey, Jesus, let me interrupt for a second, Miranda. Jesus, you've got something going on with your mic this morning. You may want to see if you can fix that while Miranda's presenting.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we are going to be talking about some of the top foods that do have carbohydrates, but really do not spike blood sugar. And we're going to start out this list with something that might actually sound a little bit more controversial than it actually is, but that is actually raspberries. Can we change the slide? Okay. Raspberries are a food that, while the majority of their calories actually do come from carbohydrates, they have a very high amount of fiber. this is one of the foods that it's actually the food that has the most amount of fiber per calorie. The carbohydrate to fiber ratio of raspberries is 1.875. Dr. Brewer talked about this on the show a while back, but one of the best things that we can do to know if a food is going to be high in glycemic carbs or not is looking at that carbohydrate to fiber ratio. And what we do is we look at the nutrient information of the food, and we look at the total carbohydrates that are in that food, and we divide it by the amount of fiber that's in the food. And if that gives us a number less than 5, then it's a food that's very unlikely to spike blood sugar. So with this carbohydrate to fiber ratio of 1.875, it is very unlikely to spike your blood sugar when it's in its whole form. If you're eating it in something like raspberry jelly that has that's like broken down and also has added sugars, that's not going to be as beneficial, right? We want to eat whole raspberries. Black raspberries and red raspberries are both very healthy. They have a lot of polyphenols. The type of polyphenols that they have are anthocyanins. These act as like antioxidants in the body that reduce inflammation. They actually decrease interleukin-6 and high sensitivity tumor necrosis factor alpha. And they help improve the variety of the gut flora. Now, when you introduce different species of plants into your diet, they all have different types of fiber. And these different types of fiber allow different species of bacteria in the gut to grow. And the raspberries help support the healthy gut bacteria that we have. Can we go to the next slide?
Sure. And
do you guys have any questions or comments about this?
I do have one quick question. Dr. Brewer, I'm still breaking up.
You sound good so far. We'll see.
Okay. And we kind of give you a spoiler with the chickpeas, but that carbohydrate to fiber ratio, we're going to explain further. Dr. Miranda is going to help us explain that further after we review these 5 foods. Just keep in mind, everything that is lower than 5, that means that it has more fiber in relations to carbohydrates. So the fiber will decrease the spike of the blood sugar right from the absorption part and the intestines. Mm-hmm. So just keep that in mind. We're going to explain further later on. So I'll let you continue, Miranda.
Thanks, Jesus. Yeah, I will be explaining that after we go over the top 5 foods. Food number 4, I would say, are chickpeas. These are also called garbanzo beans. These have a carbohydrate to fiber ratio of 3.6. They're very high in fiber, protein, and micronutrients like folate. With a cup of cooked chickpeas, you get about 70% of your daily requirement of folate, and this is in its natural folate form, not folic acid. You get a bunch of iron, zinc, copper, and magnesium. A cup has about 60% of your daily requirements of copper, 20% of magnesium, 25% of zinc and iron. Chickpeas have something called the second meal effect, and that means that if I eat chickpeas with my dinner, my blood sugar can be more well controlled all the way up until my second meal, which would be for my first meal of the next day. It can help level out your blood sugar and have a steady increase instead of a spike, followed by an insulin spike and then a swift drop. That doesn't happen with chickpeas. You get a very level maintenance of your blood sugar. And not only when you eat chickpeas alone, but when you eat chickpeas with other foods, chickpeas can actually help curb the blood sugar spike that you could get from other foods that you may be including in your diet. And chickpeas also have some cancer preventing effects. So it's one of the, in my opinion, it's the best legume to include in your diet, but other legumes can also be helpful.
I do have a question, Miranda. Before the show, we were sharing, I tried to eat some chickpeas. And my wife was like, well, cooking chickpeas is just too hard. I'm not even going to do that for you. I love you, but I don't love you that much. What's your
very
recommendation?
Smart woman.
What's your recommendation on cooking chickpeas?
It's best to cook chickpeas in a pressure cooker. If you cook them in a pressure cooker for about 45 minutes and then let them sit until the pressure from the pot releases, that they should be perfectly soft. When you cook them in a regular pot, it can take a very long time and they can be pretty hard. Even after like 2 hours. So using a pressure cooker for them is a lot easier. It's a lot faster. You just have to be careful with releasing the pressure and not burning yourself.
Well,
with the steam.
That sounds like a challenge to me, but I'm pretty sure my wife can help me out with that. Let's go to the number 3.
Yeah, it can be a challenge to learn how to use the pressure cooker, but once you do, it's a learning curve. But once you do, it's really beneficial and you can cook a lot of things a lot faster. Can we change the slide to the next one, please? Okay, flax seeds. So flax seeds are extremely beneficial, and in my opinion, everyone should eat them unless they have some sort of an allergy to them. But they have a carbohydrate to fiber ratio of 1.08. They're very high in omega-3 fatty acids, which help us decrease inflammation. They decrease the having a high omega-3 amount in your diet helps decrease inflammation because it helps shunt the production of arachidonic acid to DHA and EPA. So it's good for helping inflammation, helping people who have heart disease, and it's extremely beneficial for your brain. We need DHA and EPA for our brain and our nerve health. This is especially important in pregnant women. Pregnant women need to be getting enough omega-6s to support the growth of the fetus. But in people with cardiovascular disease or people who are trying to prevent cardiovascular disease, this is a great way to include more omega-6s in your diet without necessarily taking a supplement. Flax seeds have been shown to help improve the microbiome and the gut flora overall. They help improve chronic constipation, and they help decrease abdominal distension. So they're very beneficial in especially the an elderly population that has issues with constipation.
So you meant omega-3s, right?
What did I say?
Omega-6s.
Oh yeah, omega-3s.
Omega-3s.
We want to decrease the omega-6s in our diet and get more omega-3s, and this helps even out the ratio.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Sorry. Oh, another thing about flax seeds is that when we buy flax seeds, it's typically in this form that you guys see here with the full shell. But the flax seeds actually have to be ground up before you can get the nutrients from them because the shell is so hard that we cannot digest it. So they should be ground up, ideally right before consuming so that the omega-3s are all intact. But yeah, it's something great to include in your diet. And you can do that with like a coffee grinder or something.
Awesome. Dr. Brewer, you have been oddly quiet today. Why is that?
I'm doing a stealth mode. I'm waiting for the fiber debate.
Oh, okay. You're preparing.
I woke up this morning thinking about this fiber debate.
All right. Well, let's go to the number two and number 1, and then we can go dive into the fiber debate then.
Yeah.
Let me help you with the slides.
Okay, thank you. So number 2 is red cabbage. And I would say other foods that can be fermented in general. Fermented foods are great to include in our diets, and red cabbage, apart from being able to ferment it, it has a lot of benefits. It has a lot of polyphenols. Red cabbage has a lot more anthocyanins and kaempferol than green cabbage. That's why I personally prefer red cabbage to green cabbage. It has a carbohydrate to fiber ratio of 3.4. Red cabbage on its own can improve the microbiome, but when it is fermented, it also provides some of the healthy species of gut flora that can help, let's say, cure a dysbiosis that you may have. And the fiber that the red cabbage has can help act as a prebiotic for that bacteria that you're introducing with the fermented foods. Red cabbage itself can decrease gut inflammation by 20 to 40%. And when it's fermented, this can drop even more. And another benefit of red cabbage is that it's high in vitamin C and vitamin K, which are necessary for us to be healthy in general.
And I asked this, Dr. Brewer, when I saw that part, and that's why I chose it on the thumbnail. A lot of people have been asking us about sauerkraut. Dr. Brewer told me there is a specific difference between sauerkraut and red cabbage or fermented red cabbage. Do you remember that, Dr. Brewer?
Well, I think sauerkraut is made using white cabbage or green cabbage compared to red cabbage. That's the only difference that I'm aware of.
Yeah. Sauerkraut is made from green cabbage and salt and water. I think those are the only ingredients. Then we have kimchi, which is a Korean version of sauerkraut that's spicy. It's really good in my opinion. I love it. But when I go for fermented vegetables, I go for red cabbage just because of the polyphenols. And here it's where I live, it's very common to make like a fermented red cabbage with like carrots, and sometimes people will include onions, but red cabbage on its own is very healthy.
Awesome. Well. So let's go to number one. And Dr. Brewer wanted controversy, but if you watched the top 5 foods that reverse plaque, you won't be surprised why this is the number one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, broccoli sprouts are the number one food and plant-based food, in my opinion, to consume. The carbohydrate to fiber ratio of these is 1.25. They have a lot of polyphenols, especially sulforaphane, which has anti-cancer effects. The anti-cancer effects that it has is basically causing the cancer cells to go into cellular death, which is called apoptosis. It can also induce the immune system to be able to find cancer cells more easily and then kill them. It's also they're also really they have a lot of benefits for brain health. They can help prevent Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease. They can also help improve insulin sensitivity. And they have a lot more benefits. However, I will also mention that there is a risk with eating any type of sprout, and that is that when they are mass produced in farms in the United States, they can possibly have contamination with E. coli. So it's something that women who are pregnant need to take into consideration and actually avoid. But if you're producing your own broccoli sprouts, which I've seen a lot of people start to do, then that shouldn't be a risk. And if that is your case and you are concerned about an E. coli contamination, then broccoli is also very healthy. It does have a lot of sulforaphane. It's just that broccoli sprouts have a lot more sulforaphane in a smaller package.
So one of the main problems that I have seen with cruciferous vegetables that includes broccoli sprouts is some people, especially those who are dealing with irritable bowel syndrome, will just get inflamed and distended with all of those cruciferous vegetables. Do you have any take on that?
I do. It's basically that people who have IBS tend to have some sort of gut dysbiosis. They tend to not have enough variety in the species of bacteria that they have in their gut. And so when you're starting out with some gut dysbiosis, and then you include foods that have a lot of fiber, especially cruciferous vegetables, then you can have a lot of discomfort especially when you're not used to eating those foods. Because of the dysbiosis that's happening. But so if you have IBS, it would still be beneficial to eat these foods. I know that a lot of people who have IBS do like a low FODMAP diet, but in my opinion, it's better to introduce these foods to your diet slowly and heal that dysbiosis, and then be able to eat more over time to help cure that. Having a gut dysbiosis is extremely uncomfortable. You can have a lot of diarrhea and constipation and bloating and just feeling not feeling like yourself, basically. So it is really important to cure, and it is a really important topic, but I don't think that avoiding these foods altogether is really the right solution for it.
And I had another question, because when we were preparing for this show last week, the initial idea was to do a show about gut health. However, we're not sure how the audience will respond to that. We know it's a popular topic. We just don't know how popular it is in our niche. But some of those foods, and there's some research that suggests specifically what you're saying, is starting eating some of those foods will start changing the microbiome, promoting some of the healthy bacteria, reducing the amounts of some unhealthy bacteria. And of course, there are other foods that will do that. One of the main problems that I see with plants, and that's something that other people are promoting, and they believe in that. I actually saw that in the Carnivore Code book from, I'm blanking on the name of the guy right now. The guy who wrote the Carnivore Code. I even follow him on YouTube. He has some really good videos regarding toxicology and environmental issues. But they are
Saladino.
Thank you, Paul Saladino. And they're talking about oxalates, lectins, and phytoalexins, and basically putting all the plants options as the poison category. And I don't think that's true for saturated fats. I mean, I don't think all the foods are necessarily poison, like maybe the other side of the discussion, the vegan side of the discussion, will say, well, you're going to be vegan for ethical and for healthy reasons because all the foods are danger. And I don't agree with that, but I also don't agree with saying that all plants are poison. I think there's always a balance. And unfortunately, having a balanced opinion sometimes is not as popular as having or as easy to say, this is the food that you need to eat. So what's your perspective on oxalates, lectins, phytoalexins on some of those plants?
Okay, so oxalates basically bind with calcium and form crystals. So eating a diet that's high in oxalates can cause the formation of kidney stones. However, foods that are higher in oxalates are like, for an example, is like spinach. You don't necessarily need to eat that. There are other plant sources that have a lot of calcium without needing to get that oxalate, the high oxalate content, such as kale. Kale has a high amount of calcium with a low amount of oxalates. There are some people who are going to be more sensitive to oxalates, and for them it may be beneficial to avoid more vegetables than others, but that's not going to be the case for the vast majority of people. And the benefits of like leafy green vegetables, even the ones that have oxalates, for the vast majority of the population are going to be more beneficial than they are going to be harmful. And generally, we see problems with oxalates in people who are sensitive to them and also eat a ton of spinach. Like we'll have like a lot of green smoothies or something like that. We usually see these people who problems in people who go from like one extreme to another, like when you're switching from like the standard American diet to, let's say, a raw vegan diet, which is also extreme, and eating like doing a lot of juices, and that increases the oxalate content of your food very quickly. Looking at lectins, one of the foods here on the list has lectins. Legumes are a big source of lectins. However, when you cook legumes and then you rinse them off, you actually remove the vast majority of the lectins that are in the food. Like it's not the same looking at the lectin content of a raw garbanzo bean or chickpea than when you cook it and wash it. It decreases dramatically. And then the third one I'm actually not familiar with, honestly.
The phytoalexins. Yeah, they're basically saying it's kind of the same thing. Like the plants are developing some kind of mechanism to not be eating, and logically it makes sense. That's what I can understand why people believe that and see some evidence and suggest that that's truth. But also, I mean, it's a balance level between the nutrients that you can get and the source where you're going to get it. And I think it doesn't matter what healthy diet you're following. I think we can all agree that processed foods are the worst thing that you can do, and that sometimes even growing your own food might be the best option if you want to do that. And we support all of those perspectives at the end. But it's important to have kind of a balanced view and know the opinions on the other side to decide what works better for you. What we wanted to do today with this list was to present you some options, because a lot of people come to us and say, well, just tell me what to eat, right? If I like to do this diet, which involves some of those low carb foods, what can I eat that is not going to mess up with my blood sugar? So you can choose to go carnivore, of course, but if you don't want to go carnivore, here are some options that you might want to consider. Before we move on with the next part, Dr. Brewer said at the beginning, not all carbohydrates are the same, and we're going to discuss that. And we're going to discuss a little bit more about fiber. This is an open invite. Gilbert, can you put the number? So if you want to become a patient or get some additional or personalized opinion regarding your health, just call us 859-721-1414 or visit PrevMedHealth.com. That's the sponsor for today, PrevMed. Dr. Brewer, you are the star of the show, and I know you're analyzing what to do, but this has become the Miranda and Jesus show. And where are you?
You're getting a little bit nervous.
I mean, people miss you.
I know you enjoy giving the show, but let me just another technical comment. Your mic is sort of out of focus now. I'm not sure what happened. I think something might have bumped into your system. So a comment. I promised that I was going to talk a little bit more about this fiber thing. Has anybody ever heard of this? Munch. As you can see, it's an advanced fiber fusion. Robert Lustig, when he came on the show, he talked. We asked him about that. He's a co-founder of that company. He's a very, very strong believer in fiber, and his perspective is, look, there are a lot of things out there that are poisons. As you know, he's big into glucose being a poison, but even more so, fructose being a poison, and linking it to, he makes a good case to link a lot of the biochemistry to alcohol, drawing comparisons where both alcohol and fructose really don't impact the blood sugar immediately. They go straight to the liver, and they both can cause challenges with the liver. I agree with a lot of the stuff that Lustig says, but not everything. Same thing with Ken Berry and Eric Westman. They get into I watched a couple of their videos this past weekend where Ken was saying, he was talking about rotting in the gut. He said he was watching, I don't know if it was Make the Vegan, but it was one of the vegan content creators was saying, meat rots in the gut. So let me go back and just give a couple of positions myself. And let me clarify, as Jesus would say, I'm not a researcher in this area. I'm not quoting the highest level of research, but I have looked a little bit. I need to look more. The fact that this comes up again is stimulating me to look more. If you look at fiber, there is no deficiency state for fiber. It's not an essential nutrient. So what does that mean? We'll talk about that in a second. The anti-fiber crowd that's saying it would rot in your colon, that fiber rots in your colon, they quote things. There's videos about people that have got an ileostomy, for example, and they'll say, oh, I don't ever see meat come out of the ileostomy. I see corn, I see vegetable, I see fiber materials. So Ken has said, well, so that means that no, meat's not rotting in your colon, fiber is. Rotting is nothing but bacteria acting on a substrate. So I think that's a little bit too much of a stretch for either side to talk about things rotting in the colon.
I think there's too many things that are too much weight of evidence that would indicate that we need our gut biome. It's good, and the gut biome has a positive role. It can get messed up, and when it does, that is a problem. But this debate about whether fiber or meat rots in your colon, I think is a silly debate on both sides. I think we do need to have things, quote, rotting in our colon. We do need to have bacteria acting on substrates in our colon. Regarding Lustig, I don't quite agree. I mean, he will go so far as to say anything's okay, including tons of fruit, just so it's not processed. And his quote is, "Anything that nature makes is okay, just so it's you don't unwrap it." Fructose may be a poison, but it's wrapped in the antidote. He's talking about fiber. I think he overstates that as well. At least, I mean, he's very much aware of diabetes. He's an endocrinologist. He's dealt with this forever. I think he's to give credit to both sides. I think Ken and Eric are both saying, I think they're more responding to this statement about things rotting. I don't really think that they think that fiber is bad rotting in your colon. Lustig, on the other hand, I don't think he believes that somebody should be drinking all the orange juice they want, or even eating all of the oranges that they want. Again, I'm going to go back to the comment that I think all of us may have there may be some more minor debates going on. I don't think anybody would say fiber is bad for you. There may be a few people, but I haven't seen a credible argument to say fiber is bad for you at all. I think it gets a little bit too far when you say it's an essential nutrient. And I think it also gets a little bit too far when you say you can eat anything just so you have, just put a little bit of munch in your cereal.
I have 2 comments for you on that, Dr. Brewer. First one is, why can't you just make up your mind and decide if you're going to be carnivore or vegan? Just choose a side.
I'm just not going to do it, Jesus. I know it would be so much easier for you running the channel because, for example, and even, Miranda, all 3 of us know right now, I think carnivore is more popular for a huge portion of the YouTube watching population, or at least our group. But there's plenty of plant-based people in our group as well. I think it's a group that's not quite as vocal.
Yeah, and for those who are asking, how often do we eat meat? Dr. Brewer and I, we eat meat on a daily basis. We are just more of what we call omnivore. So we're pick and choosing what we want to eat. We are not eating just plants. We're not eating just meat, but we're eating both. And also, I just wanted to put this out. We're not sponsored by Munch or anything. They're not paying us any dime for.
We're sponsored by us.
Dr. Brewer likes to promote things that he likes. That includes Munch.
So back to your question, why can't I make up my mind? I've made up my mind. I'm omnivore. So a couple of days of the week, I'm living with somebody who's a vegan. A couple of days of the week, I'm living with somebody who's an omnivore. I'm an omnivore. And the reason I can't I've made up my mind. I'm an omnivore. And quite often I'll mention to my vegan friends and my carnivore friends, I wish you guys could just calm down and play nice with each other.
Everybody's looking to do the same, which is being healthy. So let's go to the academics. Back to the academics. Enough of the emotional side. I'm about to cry now. Let's go to the differences between carbohydrates and explain a little bit more on fiber and what's the role on fiber.
Okay, so the slides look a little bit different than what I was expecting, but so there are different types of carbohydrates, as Dr. Brewer was saying in the very beginning. Not all carbohydrates are the same. Carbohydrates can be broken down into simple carbohydrates and complex carbohydrates. The simple carbohydrates are monosaccharides, like glucose and fructose, and then disaccharides are basically combinations of two monosaccharides. It can be glucose and glucose. It can be glucose and fructose. It can be glucose and galactose, which makes lactose. Then if we look at complex carbohydrates, we have starch, and then there are different types of starches. There's amylose, and then there's amylopectin. Those are the main two. And starches are long chains of glucose molecules, and amylose is just one long chain of them, all interconnected. And then amylopectin is one main strand of glucose molecules with a bunch of branches coming off from it. So the glucose molecules that are in amylose are going to be more slowly digested than the glucose molecules from amylopectin. So foods that have more amylopectin are going to be more glycemic. And then we have fiber. Fiber is a type of carbohydrate that is not digested by us, but it is digested by our microbiome. It is digested by the bacteria in our gut. We ourselves cannot break it down. We do break down the other types of carbohydrates. When we're looking at a food label like this one, this food label came from a processed food. And in that processed food, it had 30 grams of total carbohydrates and 0 dietary fiber. So this would be a food that would be off limits to eat. We want to eat foods that, if they have carbohydrates, they have a carbohydrate to fiber ratio of 5 or less. And I'm going to talk about a little bit more about that. Can we go to the next slide, please? First of all, let's talk about the different types of fiber, and both are beneficial. We have soluble fiber, and then we have insoluble fiber. Soluble fiber is the type of fiber that if you were to take it out of a plant and put it in a glass of water, it would dissolve. Once it's in the intestine, it attracts water and it turns it into a gel, and this will create a gel that basically holds on to other molecules that come from our food. It can hold on to lipids, it can hold on to other carbohydrates, it holds on to a lot of glucose. And as this goes through the intestinal tract, the glucose molecules get slowly absorbed instead of that glucose going into your bloodstream directly. Since this gel can also absorb other things, it can absorb bile salts, it absorbs cholesterol that's put into the intestine by the liver. It can help reduce the what's called enterohepatic recirculation, which is basically that it gets the toxins out of your liver and helps pull them into your chyme, into your intestinal tract, instead of reabsorbing them and having those toxins go back into your bloodstream and then have to be excreted again by the liver. Insoluble fiber is fiber that is not going to dissolve in water. It is what actually gives bulk to chyme. It's what helps you feel satiated after eating vegetables versus if you eat, like, let's say, white bread that doesn't have any fiber, that doesn't really keep you satiated, and you can tend to eat a big amount of it. But if you eat vegetables, it's harder to eat a large amount of them. This helps speed along the movement of the chyme in your gastrointestinal tract, and helps increase the amount of the frequency of going to the bathroom, and it helps prevent constipation. Both of these types of fiber are going to help your food go through your intestinal tract without absorbing all of the glucose, or at least without absorbing it all very quickly. So when you have foods that are high in fiber, you do absorb glucose, but at a slower rate than if you were to just eat the glucose. Like if you were to just have like a soda or a juice or something like that, that provides glucose and fructose that basically just goes right into your bloodstream. Versus if you were to eat some fruit, it does slow down the digestion. And then there's a debate on like how much fruit is acceptable and what fruits are acceptable. The best fruits to eat are berries. And then there are other fruits that can still have some benefits, but if you have insulin resistance, you might want to stay away from them, like pineapple and papaya.
And thank you for mentioning that, because papaya is known to help you with the bowel movement at the expense of very high amounts of glucose and some fructose on it.
It does.
Yeah, go ahead.
That's what kind of makes nutrition complicated. And it's that every single thing that we eat can have benefits and it can also have drawbacks. And we have to balance them out and see what's worth it. But also, it's better to look at your diet as a whole instead of each individual food. So like your dietary pattern overall is going to be more important than one individual food that you decide to include in your diet.
And going back to the point of fiber, we had, Dr. Burr said we had Dr. Lupstick on the show, and when he was asked about what about both types of fiber, and he said you need both. And if you're on a carnivore diet, I can agree when you think, well, if I'm not eating sugar, why do I need fiber on it? And if I believe that a carnivore diet is going to help me improve my gut biome, I mean, I think there's evidence that supports that. If you're eating some carbs, you might want to be mindful of complementing those carbs with some fiber that's within that food itself. And of course, this doesn't include processed carbs, and this doesn't mean that you can eat any carb just because you're eating more fiber. That's not the way it works. All right.
Not that you can't eat any. I would just say that, like, even when we're talking about veering from your general diet, your routine, and like eating something that you usually wouldn't, like as a cheat meal, even in those instances, eating foods that are high in fiber first can blunt the spike that you would otherwise have from eating those carbohydrates. Like, let's say you're going to eat birthday cake or something like that. Though if you eat the birthday cake first, the glucose is going to be absorbed by your intestine much quicker if you eat it on its own than if you were to eat like a salad first and then eat the cake. Then it will help. It can help the effects of the glucose going into your bloodstream and raising your blood sugar. But it's not something you want to do frequently.
Oh yeah, but wait. You might not want to do it. Dr. Brewer has a confession. Well, he has done that confession with us. Do you want to tell the audience what do you eat 3 times a week, Dr. Brewer? Of course, it's a healthy option the way you eat it.
Are you ratting me out that I eat ice cream?
Well, we both have a sweet tooth. We know that. And what do you do? What do you do to avoid the spikes in blood sugar, Dr. Brewer?
I don't get that much of a spike with it, and usually within half an hour it's back down, even when I do get a spike. And what's interesting is, as you know, we'll be sharing it at some point on one of the upcoming videos. I'm remaining ketotic. So that's my goal, remaining ketotic. And so there's a couple of things. I exercise more and more intensely than most folks my age. I'm 66, soon to be 67. And I don't eat a whole lot. And so both the exercise and the decreased caloric intake allow me to maintain ketosis.
Thank you. And I can share with you.
Even when I'm eating, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Pardon the interruption, but it helped me to maintain ketosis. To get back to your original point, even when I'm eating ice cream 2 and 3 times a week.
I love how you go into bunny holes just to say yes at the end. Yeah, and I can tell you the other thing about fiber, or what other option there is. What I do, and this is popular knowledge. This is nothing new. But I haven't done that until maybe months ago. I didn't know anything about this probably 2 or 3 years ago, and I was already a graduated physician. The way you eat your food, I eat meat every day, and what I do is I just eat my piece of steak or whatever I'm eating before eating everything else, and I'm eating a very low carb diet as well. And a lot of those plants are not necessarily going to spike your blood sugar because they are mostly fiber. Maybe some fruits will, And depending on the fruits you choose to do, I have tested myself. A piece of orange will increase my blood sugar like for 20 points. But if I eat some meat before that, that's not going to happen. The problem is the fructose. Some of that fructose will go straight to the liver, and the CGM on the glucose monitor will not catch that. But it's about experimenting on what works for you. I would love to say that the carnivore diet is for everybody. I don't think it is. And for some people, they might still have to eat some carbs here and there. And the body itself will create its own carb sources. So I think at the end, what we're trying to tell you is identify, if you're going to eat some low carb foods, identify those that have a lot of fiber, that won't spike your blood sugar, that don't have a lot of fructose, and stay away as much as possible from processed foods. And can we wrap it up in like less than 5 minutes, Dr. Miranda? We have like 2 slides more that you want to share.
Oh, okay, yeah. So the way that I think about the carbohydrate to fiber ratio of being 5 or less is that when you look at how how fiber works in the intestine, for every gram of fiber that we have, it kind of acts like a magnet to other things in our diet and other things that we're eating. It has about 5 to 10 spots on it to where basically it can pull in 5 to 10 grams of glucose for every gram of fiber that you have in your food, in your diet. I prefer to have people stick to a lower carbohydrate model, which is 5 or less. So we want to eat foods that have 5 grams of glucose or fewer for every gram of fiber that that food has. And if we do look at this, we can see that it's kind of like saturating the fiber with glucose. It can also absorb other things like we were talking about earlier. It can absorb lipids. It can absorb the pigment from gall. It absorbs bile salts. It absorbs cholesterol. So all of these things get mixed up in a gel that moves along your intestine and decreases the absorption of the glucose. And if we were to remove some of these glucose molecules, the bond between fiber and glucose is even stronger, and you end up absorbing even less glucose. But if you have something that has very little fiber, and let's say had, instead of 6 molecules of glucose, that this had like 10 or 20 molecules of glucose, those glucose molecules would detach from the fiber mix that we have a lot more easily than other foods. So let's say, look at an example of like white breads. Like processed breads are going to have a carbohydrate to fiber ratio of like 10 or 20 to 1. And if we look at something like sprouted grain breads, like the Ezekiel bread, and there are some other brands of sprouted grain bread, but those are going to have a carbohydrate to fiber ratio of like 4 to 6. So they are going to be a better option than other like more processed breads. But then when we're looking at fruit, for an example of this would be pineapple. So pineapple has a carbohydrate to fiber ratio of about 9. And it's not going to affect everybody's blood sugar, but if you have insulin resistance, it is likely to affect your blood sugar, and it's something you need to watch out for. But if we look at a food like raspberries, raspberries have 1.8 grams of glucose for every gram of fiber, which is very low. So that's just an example of things that you can compare and look at when you are deciding on what things you want to eat and include in your diet.
Do you mind if we go to the Q&A section? Before that, any closing remarks, Dr. Brewer?
No, I think, I'm seeing a heck of a lot of interest with the questions, and I'm glad that we're getting there. You may have heard my little typewriter clicking or my keyboard clicking in the background. As you know, I'm trying to answer as many questions as possible. So,
and I'm trying to avoid that from happening. Not at all. We want to help as much people as we can.
I'm going to start off with a question. So, Dr. Graham, you and I have talked, and it sounded like we debated a lot over guidelines around carbs.
Do you want to share what that mini debate is about?
About, you mean whether or not
net carbs versus glycemic carbs?
Oh yeah, net carbs
versus glycemic. Could you do that before we get? Let me ask the first question.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Okay. So net carbs are basically when you look at the total amount of carbs in a food, usually a plant or a processed food, you're going to have total carbohydrates, which includes all the different types of carbohydrates that we spoke about. And then the net carbs are going to be the total carbohydrates minus the fiber. That is going to be the net carbs. But some people use the term net carbs and glycemic carbs interchangeably, but they're not really interchangeable, because if you are eating a food like broccoli, broccoli does have net carbs, but those carbs do not affect your blood sugar. So we want to look at glycemic carbs being carbohydrates coming from foods that do spike your blood sugar, and usually coming from foods that have a higher carbohydrate to fiber ratio, usually higher than 5 or 10.
So your point is that even though broccoli has some potentially glycemic carbs in there, it's so not overloaded, it's so loaded with fiber that those quote glycemic carbs never really hit the bloodstream.
Right, because they are net carbs, but I would not say that they're glycemic carbs, because they don't have that effect on your blood sugar. So glycemic carbs are carbohydrates that raise your glycemia, but if the carbohydrates that you're eating are not raising your blood sugar, then they don't have glycemic carbohydrates. And that's why they're different from net carbs, because while all plants are going to have net carbs, not all of those carbs are going to be glycemic. And I know this sounds really complicated, but that's
it depends on if they can reach the bloodstream or not. And if they're surrounded by fiber, they're very likely not to reach the bloodstream, at least, or not do it that not reaching the bloodstream that quickly.
Yeah, something to keep in mind when we're talking about food and like food research and what the contents of a food are, is that you research the contents of food in a vacuum, like not in humans, but then humans, we are not machines. We're digesting the foods, we're metabolizing the foods in a way that is different than when you are in vitro. So the way that our metabolism works is basically the more fiber that we eat, the less of the other carbohydrates we absorb. And that doesn't mean that if you eat fiber, you can eat whatever you want after that. It's just that overall, fiber does have a lot of benefits. And for once we move on to the final slide, we'll talk about. We have one more slide, right?
No, let's move on to the questions. We burn our bridge on the time right there. Yeah.
Okay. Then we can move on. But
it's already 53 minutes.
Yeah. So just one last comment, and then we'll do questions. Which is fiber, while it may not be an essential nutrients, are nutrients that we need for our metabolism. We don't need fiber for our metabolism because it's not something that we metabolize. It's something that stays in our gastrointestinal tract and is metabolized it's digested by our bacteria. And when we have a lot of fiber, it's more beneficial for that bacteria, and that provides us with a lot of benefits for our health. And it can be benefits for all of our different systems. And that's why it's an important part of our diet, even though it's not considered an essential nutrient, because it's not.
Well, there are people who say that we're not eating for one, we're eating for 1 trillion in our gut biome. And that's important to consider.
Robert Lustig would say that. And I think he's got a point there.
Yeah. I also see some of the research where they say when you're eating processed foods, processed sugars, the very first place where you start producing that dopamine rush is in your gut biome. The bacteria itself is promoting that dopamine that will keep you addicted to those types of sugars. So taking care of the gut health, of course, is important as well with what you eat.
Yet another reason why we are not bomb calorimeters.
Yep. All right, let's go to questions. Can you hit us with the water ball, Gilbert? Only the water ball, if you have it. Dr. Burr paid a lot for that water bottle. So
I
we need to keep
did. I
listening.
think it was what, $35 about 6 years ago. So we better use it. It's a
All
great
right.
water bottle.
It is. Joe, thank you for becoming a member. Just next to the subscribe button, there's the button that says join, a couple of bucks just to get your question answered first. I'm sorry if we're not going to be able to answer all of your questions. Thank you so much for contributing in the chat. Dr. Burr has been trying to answer some of those. I'm gonna see some of the YouTube members like Keith Lawson from Arizona, Richard Militello, thank you so much, and Joe, who just became a member. Just joined. Have really learned a lot from Dr. Burr, changing my life. Thank you so much. We appreciate that. We know there's a lot of nuance on all of those topics, and unfortunately, there's no one size fits all solution. So it's all about experimenting with yourself and identifying what works for you. Joe SXM, if you fail the OGTT without insulin testing, is there any reason to the OGTT with insulin? Dr. Brewer, that's for you.
I hate to answer a question with a question, but how do you define failing an OGTT?
Well, I'm guessing he just went over 140 on the first hour, probably, or even higher than that.
And I'm being obviously also a little bit, and what's the word? Rhetorical. So a blood sugar that peaks at 200 and then goes to 240 at 2 hours, with an insulin of 5, never getting over 5, is very different from a blood sugar that does the same thing, 200 and goes a little bit higher, but has insulin responses going up to 150 and 200. So that's a very, very different pancreatic response. Yes, I mean, as Joe, it sounds like you may be aware that we do a Kraft insulin survey annually or we recommend one annually for our patients, but a lot of patients know they're diabetic already and don't want to do it. I think the most valid reason is we have a few patients who have very significant sweets addictions. And they say, look, if I take that sugary stuff for this test, I'm going to be back on that sweets bandwagon for months before I get off of it again. It's not worth it. Don't do that. But if it doesn't bother you that much in terms of your diet, it is very, very helpful to understand what's going on with insulin, because that gives us an understanding of what's going on with your pancreas.
Thank you so much, Dr. Burr. I'm putting this out. Drugs of the North. He has been a long time viewer. He was away for a while. You probably missed it during that hiatus period of yours, Drax. Search for Dr. Burr and Shonamara. We had Dr. Shonamara on the show a few months back. Joe SXM, if a statin inhibits LDL, VLDL creation in the liver, what happens to the triglycerides that previously would have been included in the VLDL particle that are not being made due to statin? That's an interesting point. Basically, he's saying if you are using statins and blocking the carriers, what happens with all those triglycerides, Dr. Brewer?
I'm glad because I didn't understand that question.
What happens with the cargo if you get rid of the transport?
Well, I don't know that it doesn't totally get rid of transport. You know, we see a lot of patients on statins. We see a lot of lean mass hyperresponders on statins, and statins may decrease it a little bit, but it's like not a huge amount. Either of you have, you guys do this with me every day. Either of you have a different perspective on that? I'm not sure that I'm answering his. I'm not sure that I'm understanding the assumption. I think there's an assumption that you take a statin, it's going to do away with your cholesterol particles, and it does not.
Mm-hmm. There's just so much that a statin can do on that regard. If you're still producing a lot of triglycerides, your body is going to still try to produce a lot of carriers and a lot of vehicles, and I think a lot of that is going to stay on the liver. It does. It's going to stay on the liver. And of course, the statin can promote and help to produce less triglycerides, but it's not going to be enough. you want to control your triglycerides with what you eat and not rely on statins.
Did you notice, Miranda, who was talking when we went beyond 1 hour?
Jesus.
Yeah.
It was Jesus.
Okay.
I mean,
See you next week, guys.
You see the
Thank you.
problem.
You were
So,
saying, Miranda, you wanted to bring out to this topic, right?
Well, I was just going to say that some of those triglycerides can stay in the liver, but your diet is going to be the most important factor in all of this. And while statins can be a help, we use them very sparingly.
Yes, we've got Jesus is doing a great job getting us set up to bring on a lot of other content creators, and I'm afraid that our new friend Eric Westman might be doing some of his infamous reaction videos to some of our stuff. He called me the other day and was saying, "Oh gosh, you use a lot of statins and you do this and you do that," and I'm going, "Oh my gosh, here we go." We're still going to have him on board, and we'll hopefully get a chance to clean up some of the misperceptions. It's just like Jesus said earlier about, oh gosh, what was it? You were saying you said I should just go ahead and make a choice and go either carnivore or vegan and make things simple. Same thing with statins. I should just say no statins or, Katie bar the door with statins. But unfortunately, life is just not that simple, is it?
Yeah. I mean, when you look at statin use, and when we talk about statin use, I think people assume that we use a lot of statins when we really, it is something that we use in a very low dose, and we only recommend a couple of types, and only in people who already have documented plaque.
Yeah.
Yeah. Rick Foley, I don't think we're going to have enough time to go over Dr. Miranda's full diet. We know, and she's open about she prefers a plant-based diet. However, when we have patients that are relying on carnivore, Dr. Miranda helps us a lot on providing some support to those patients so they can still have their carnivore diet, but get some of the nutrients that they might be missing. And we can talk about references. If you have, Miranda, if you have some references about the effects of fiber on brain health and cancer prevention, that will be good. So we can share them and people can take a look at those research and see on your own if that's something that you think it's good enough.
If I could interrupt and make a comment there.
Please do.
I noticed somebody else was saying, "Oh, all those studies are created by big food." I'm actually, as I look, we all know food epidemiology is a nightmare for a whole bunch of reasons. So much, for example, we had the guy come on and talk about, I'm blanking on his name, the ophthalmologist who's so concerned about seed oils. And the bottom line on that food epidemiology. Yeah, Dr. Kenobi, Chris Kenobi. The problem with all of that seed oil evidence is that it's environmental. There's no one-to-one. There's no clinical trial. There's no, there's no single clinical trial, let alone a meta-analysis of multiple clinical trials. So we're all depending on our assumptions. But I think, yes, who funds it is a big deal. But I think a far bigger issue is the assumptions that the research group takes into their research from the beginning. So I'll just leave that.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And Joe is sharing, I get most of my carbs from blueberries and other berries. Those are the fruits that we recommend.
Yeah.
There will be some fructose, but I don't think there's that many. And of course, you cannot just sit down and eat a bowl of berries every day. I don't think a cup of berries a day is such a big problem. We have had patients that have tried berries and they were like, it wasn't until I stopped the berries that I started losing weight. So it depends. Everybody will react differently.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
Yeah, everyone does react differently. It really is going, like, looking at how it can affect your blood sugar, it's really going to depend on your level of insulin resistance and the amount of fructose in berries. I mean, if you eat too many berries, you can overload in fructose, but it's recommended to have about half a cup to a cup of berries a day, which should not overload you in fructose.
What do you think?
I did a video once where I did a Mott's applesauce OGTT, I think I failed it. But I think they add a lot of either high fructose corn syrup or glucose to mites. So just underlining the point that be careful about, quote, healthy fruit, end quote.
Yeah, exactly right. And people would like to say all fruits are bad or all fruits are good. It's just like plants and meats. It depends. Not
Yeah.
all plants are bad. Not all fruits are bad. Some are better than others.
Yeah, and when looking at apples, it's going to be different eating one apple versus eating applesauce, which is usually, it's pureed apple, usually with extra sugar.
Yep.
But it's pureed apple. They usually take out a lot of the fiber because they remove the skins from the apple. That's going to affect your blood sugar a lot more than just eating one apple. And then apple juice is going to be the worst for your blood. So,
and that's what people give to their kids, right? To school.
Right.
Yep.
Juice is not healthy.
All right. What about let's wrap this up with one of your greatest hits, Dr. Brewer. What about oatmeal?
I don't have that. I'm not in the office where I have in my other office, I have two little sandwich bags that I don't keep sandwiches in because I don't eat sandwiches. But I have steel cut oats in one and instant oats in the other. And it's really clear. Those instant oats are flat flakes, whereas the steel cut oats are like little BBs. And there's a reason why instant oats you can make in 5 minutes or less. Your body can turn it into sugar in 5 minutes or less, but not so much steel cut oats.
Yeah.
Miranda, you look like you're chomping at the bit there. You wanting to say something?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. They're just so different. And it's like when you look at steel cut oats, you have like the physical fiber around the oats that your body has to get through and digest for you to be able to absorb any of the glucose. And when you have just like instant oats, you don't have all of that challenge for your intestines. So it just goes right into your bloodstream. So, I mean, it may there's just no comparison between instant oats and steel cut oats.
It's like we say, eat to the glucometer and find out. All right. So that's for the show for today. Thank you so much for being nice in the comments. We're all here trying to get healthier, and we're looking forward to see you next week. For those who made it to the end of the video, I'm gonna spoil the beans. We had a conversation with Dr. Saivas, and we're going to be showing that for you next week. A lot of statins, Dr. Brewer was fiercely defending statins. Not at all. There is a lot of nuance. You will see that on the show.
So, quick translation, spoil the beans. Most of us are thinking spill the beans, but that's Jesusism. And Jesus has been trying to get me to make a new sign-off statement. I used to say, thanks for your interest, but I've got a new one. But Miranda, why don't you do your sign-off first, if you have one?
My sign-off? Oh, man, I wasn't expecting this. I was just thinking about how, spoiling the surprise plus spilling the beans does make sense to why you would get spoiling the beans. But anyways, thank you so much for having me on the show today. And thank you guys for your interest in what we're talking about.
Well, since Miranda stole mine, I always say thanks for your interest. I have to come up with a new one. And Jesus has been trying to get me to do that anyway. So how about this, Jesus? Don't let Tony the Tiger take over dinner.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
Thank you.